Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
If you're a fan of comic books and comic book conventions, Daytona Beach Comic Con needs to be on your list of must-attend events. It's a show that actually focuses on comic books. Imagine that! This year's event is happening on Saturday, September the 6th, and Sunday, September the 7th. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. There's a new convention in town, and it's sure to be mega fun without the mega expense. Comics, toys, collectibles, pop culture. ShadowCon, Saturday, February 1st, 2025, in Orlando, Florida. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. If you find yourself in the Orlando area, and let's be honest, doesn't everyone come to Orlando for the House of Mouse? Head over to Coliseum of Comics to get your comic book fix. Be sure to check out their location on East Colonial Drive, where they carry a wide selection of independent comics, including Silverline books. Stop by and don't forget to tell them Silverline sent you. Hey, if you're an independent comic creator looking to get your comic printed, look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our comics and do a fantastic job. They can even print special edition covers. When you reach out to them, be sure to tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kelber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday night as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Hello, Internet, and welcome back to That Silverline Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, joined as always by Ron Fortier.
Hey, we're back.
And Jose Fuentes.
Hello, everybody, or should I say howdy?
Howdy, indeed. And if there is some chittering background noise, I apologize. We tried doing some troubleshooting before the show, but couldn't quite get it figured out. I have no idea what it is, but unfortunately, it's not something that I can actually physically change from here. Sounds like a connection issue. So you might notice me muting people throughout. I'm not cutting them off. I am trying to preserve our audio quality.
Internet gremlins.
Exactly.
Right.
But we do have some housekeeping today before we get into tonight's show, which is talking about westerns and revenge stories. Part of the housekeeping is, of course, promoting Ron's Comic Hamlet's End, which is going to be directly related to our topic, so we'll get to that in a second. Before then, let's talk about our host network, the Madness Entertainment Network, our Madness Entertainment Group. If you don't know, that they also help host our podcast and run us on several other channels. In 2 days, well, technically 2.5, February 28th, 8:30 a.m., they are doing a launch party for Tim Vigil's Gothic Knights Revamped. If you're not familiar, Tim Vigil is a veteran comic creator, and Gothic Knights was a homage to classic horror that he ran back in the day that is, I believe, being redone, possibly some new content added in as well, if not just a redux. And that is being promoted on the 28th, 8:30 a.m. You can head on over to Madness Entertainment Group, YouTube, X, any of the channels. Give them a follow. Hit the notify me bell on that. and join them for that show, and hopefully get yourself some cool gothic horror comics as well from that. But we don't have a trailer for that, but what we do have a trailer for is Hamlet's End. So I'll go ahead and run that Hamlet's End trailer and let Ron talk a little bit after that.
Docking complete.
The Western genre is ripe for a comeback, with dynamic characters, intense action, and the rich American landscape. It's a storyteller's dream. That's why we've created our own Western adventure, gritty, raw, and ready for you. I'm Ron Fortier, the writer of Hamlet's End. In my 50-year career, I've written everything from Popeye, Peter Pan, The Green Hornet, Rambo, Terminator, and Gene Roddenberry's Lost Universe, among many of my own creations. This is my first Western. Our story is set in Arkansas, 1870, where a young woman named Dallas Maddox embarks on a journey of vengeance after her family is brutally murdered. Although a natural-born hunter, this time her prey is the two-legged variety. We wanted to capture the tension of survival in a lawless time, and Dallas is a character who embodies both strength and vulnerability. This is more than just another Western. This is a story of revenge, of survival, of one determined young woman facing impossible odds. It's not just about shootouts and chases. This is about justice and how far one person will go to get it. We've a gripping story with a remarkable heroine and jaw-dropping artwork. Now we need your help to bring this vision to life. Vengeance rides on the horizon. Dallas Maddox is ruthless and deadly, leaving legends and bodies in her wake as she grows into the most feared bounty hunter the West has ever known. Don't miss the ride. Don't miss Hamlet's End, Issue 1.
There we go. So Hamlet's End, issue number 1 on Kickstarter now. A little under halfway there, 9 days left to go, 49 backers, and lots of cool different rewards you can get if you order. If you are inclined to draw a horse like Jose and I did last week, you can, of course, go for the sketch cover. All right. Ron, tell us a little bit about Hamlet's End before we get into tonight's subject.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all tied together, which obviously is going to be a good segue. But Hamlet's End basically is a revenge story. It's the story of a young girl, age about 12, 13 years old when it opens up in issue number 1. And while she's out hunting rabbits one day, a gang of outlaws rides into her farm where her mom and dad are and basically murder them, steal what little money they can find from the house, and ride off. Dallas, protagonist is named Dallas Maddox, makes it back to the ranch just in time to see the outlaws ride off, and i.e. identify them, see them, and their images, there's 5 of them seared into her brain. She comes home and basically buries her parents, puts whatever little belongings she has and wants to keep in the family wagon, and proceeds to ride into the nearest town. She goes to see the sheriff there and, tells him, hey, my parents have been killed by outlaws and I got a good look at them, and, what are you going to do about it? Well, the sheriff, basically hems and haws, but ultimately isn't going to do anything about it because he understands by her description who the gang is. And they're one of the deadliest raider bunches in the state. And he has no intentions of putting his own neck in the noose and going after them. He gives us some feeble excuse about the fact that they're probably out of his jurisdiction now. There's nothing he can do about it. And the best she can do is, go find some relatives to live with or whatever. All right. But Dallas doesn't accept that answer. She is burning inside with a rage for justice. And since she's not going to get it from the traditional means, the local sheriff, the law, in the town, in the county, she right there and then makes this, ridiculous pledge to herself that she is going to hunt down these killers and basically make them pay for what they did. And that's what kicks off the series. I mean, this is going to be a 5-issue miniseries. And by the end of issue number 1, other characters will come into play, which I'm not going to give away. I'm not going to, give total spoilers to what's available in the story. But it launches, the concept and the narrative so that we tell the story as is. She's going to go off and learn the things she has to learn to make her vow come true. When we get to issue number 2, which I've already scripted, she's 5 years older, 5-6 years older, and now is proficient with guns, rifles, tracking, etc., and has become a bona fide bounty hunter in the West and has a reputation. And her entire life is basically lived on finding out more and more about the outlaw gang she's been chasing for 6 years. And as we get into issue number 2, she starts to put some of the, tips she's been given, some of the things she's unearthed, and slowly but methodically now is hunting and getting closer and closer to that gang. And, like I said, it's an iconic story of revenge, i.e. there's where the action is, there's where, the adventure is, et cetera, but it also plays off, as a writer, the ability to deal with characterization. Whereas Dallas, on one hand is a typical 12 or 13-year-old girl on the frontier, and almost overnight, she's forced into maturity. All right. Whatever childhood she has, whatever, innocence, I'm going to be a young girl growing up and doing whatever, young women do is gone. That's all been taken away from her. And now, by issue number 2, like I said, she's pretty much a methodical killer, i.e., bounty hunter working on the side of the law, but she's as deadly as the people she chases. That's Hamlet's End.
Very cool. So, Kirsten, tonight's topic is revenge stories and how it ties into Westerns. And while not, mutually inclusive, you usually find a lot of really good revenge stories as Westerns. Or if nothing else, you find kind of elements of Westerns peppered into other revenge stories that exist in other genres or vice versa, things like that. And I think kind of you hit on a little bit as we talked about this subject throughout this month, but part of, I think, why this is so common is part of the American mythology of this is a time when the average person, in a lot of cases, had to take the law into their own hands, like Dallas Maddox has to do here, where either the local law enforcement is either one person and stretched way too thin, or you're out in the middle of lawless country and you may have a farmstead, but you have to take care of yourself. So I think it's really kind of a fun jumping off point for tonight's story is how this is a point where you're kind of hitting on the reality of the West End at some points, where you have a lawman who hasn't heard of a town and surrounding area, but really all that means is that he gets familiar with the gangs and who to mess with and who not to mess with.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And so it's up to Dallas to take the law into her own hands and kind of seek justice. And, you know, in perhaps modern context, this would be horrifying of seeing like a little girl run around like suburban Texas hunting down a gang. But at the time, this kind of story wasn't actually all that unheard of. So what sort of revenge stories have you researched or were inspired you as you're going into crafting the story for Hamlet's End?
Well, I mean, basically, you know, the concept and the settings I've seen, you know, I've read Western comics growing up as a kid. All right. And we talked about this last week. I mean, literally every major comic company in the 50s and 60s, the 40s, 50s, 60s was publishing Western comics. They were all doing it. And when we say that, I think it's good to make, you know, our listeners understand they were doing traditional Western stories. All right. I mean, these weren't weird Westerns. All right. These were pioneer people living out on the range, on the frontier, in the Badlands, in the western part of the United States that hadn't been completely settled, completely civilized. Pioneers were still going out there. You still had Native American tribes scattered everywhere. You had villages or towns made up of freed slaves from the Civil War. That 10-year period after the Civil War was pretty much a real wild frontier. And so, as you alluded to, Tim, you know, the idea is most of the movies that I saw growing up were reflected in those comic books. And basically the idea was if, you know, you went out and lived in, unmanned territory or whatever, unexplored territory or stuff that wasn't part of the statehood, then the odds are good there weren't any lawmen, you know, within hundreds of miles of where you lived. Now, most people carried weapons, for survival, for hunting, for getting your own food, et cetera, et cetera. But again, if you were wrong, if you had a farm and, you know, in the middle of the night, somebody comes along, decides they're going to steal your cattle or steal your horses, I mean, the only way you're going to save what you have is to do it yourself. And so basically in that period of time, practically everybody and his uncle, and I'm mostly men, all right, walked around healed. They wore a gun. They carried a rifle. And that was just a part of that culture and living. Because again, like I mentioned in the start of the video for Hamlet's End, survival was never a guarantee from day to day living on the frontier. So you had to, you know, literally learn how to use those weapons as tools to protect yourself, the people you loved, and the property you had. Now, growing up and going to movies and watching this stuff, I can remember several Western films that was the storyline plot. I think one of the ones I remember the most right off the top of my head was the one that they did, this probably in the 70s with Steve McQueen, a thing called Nevada Smith. And the concept of Nevada Smith was basically his mother was a Native American woman who'd married a farmer or whatever, and he was their son, so he was a half-breed. And the idea is while he's out hunting for the family, a gang shows up and decides to have fun with his mother. The father shows up to try to stop him. They shoot the father after having raped the mother and then kill her and ride off. He comes back to the house, and in the film, he's about 15 or 16. The idea is when he finds them murdered and butchered. And the rest of the film is basically him hunting those 5 people that murdered his parents. methodically wherever they are as the years go by, one by one by one. He hunts them all down and basically, kills them. Realizing by the end of the film that, like I said, he's become this hardened person himself. And that's a self-reflective moment at the end that he's probably no better than the people he actually gunned down. So that was one. They did another one, and I'm trying to remember what the name of it was, but I think it was her. They flipped the thing. They did one with Raquel Welch, who was very popular at the time, and I think it's one of only 2 or 3 westerns she ever did. But in this one, it's the same idea where she's with her husband. They get attacked by outlaws, shoot and kill her husband, rape her, and leave her for dead. Along comes William Culp, who starred in, Trackdown on television for a while, and he did a thing with Bill Cosby called I Spy in the late 60s. But in this thing, he's a gunfighter, and he finds her half dead, nurses her, brings her back to life, and it's going to take her back into town to, get help from local people in town. And she, intuits that he's a gunfighter and basically says, no, don't take me back to town. Teach me how to do what you do. And so the first half of the film is Culp teaching her how to be a gunfighter. And then the second half of the film is she finds the guys who killed her husband and gets her own vengeance. So it's a recurring theme in Westerns. And obviously that makes it's very easy for that to play itself out, only because we're talking about this concept of, you could have done this kind of thing in a civilization that wasn't completely structured.
Right.
If you take the vengeance team into our times, into modern times, then you're on thin ice, and you're dealing with things like Charles Bronson in Death Wish.
Right.
All right. Okay. His wife and daughter are killed at the start of the film, and he's going to go out and get vengeance. But unlike a Western, he just can't do it out in the open. He's going to do it very clandestinely and get the job done anyways.
Yes. But Charles Bronson, I feel like if you also kind of like an archetype for a modern Western or a Western set of modern story, a lot of Charles Bronson movies, especially Death Wish, kind of hit that niche of if you wanted to, kind of change the era, because I feel like a lot of, you can hit a lot of the same themes and motifs in Western storytelling and what makes it such an impactful and great genre. And if you want to kind of match it up, you can look at some of those like more modern revenge stories and you see like there's so many of those good through lines.
Yeah, well, I mean, I mentioned Bronson. The minute we're talking about this, all of a sudden this light bulb went on me, and I almost forgot. Bronson did a Western vengeance movie, right, where he played an Apache, Chado's Land, right, where a bunch of cowboys and whatever end up in his village or settlement or whatever, and rape his wife just for the fun of it and go riding off. And when he gets home and finds what they've done, he goes after them alone against 10, 15, cowboys and whatever, and methodically hunts them all down for what they did.
Absolutely. I mean, kind of also then hitting on what makes a really good revenge story. We've kind of like this almost like genre agnostic, right? Looking at, and we can kind of do this backwards as well. Looking at great revenge stories that aren't necessarily Westerns, but stuff like, what really comes to mind is possibly because of the similarities to Hamlet's End, and also possibly True Grit, but the movie Leon the Professional.
Okay, right.
Yeah, similar idea. The daughter comes home, sees her parents have been murdered by a gang, but only instead of finding a lawman, finds an assassin who was living in her apartment complex.
Yeah.
But it's that same idea of you mentioned you spend a lot of time on the characterization and building up these strong, large life characters that you as the reader really want to follow and see what happens and how they develop, as well as how these relations and connections develop. And it also then lends itself to an element that is common in both revenge stories and Westerns, which is, well, depending, common but not biblical. But the idea of having a more limited cast, right, probably comes from the fact that in a Western you're probably doing like a lot of Badlands and stuff where for an entire issue you may only see the protagonist, the antagonist, and a horse.
Pretty much. Oh yes.
And so that kind of forces you as the writer to take a step in and really focus on the characters. And revenge stories, because they're so personal to the protagonist, also allow for a lot of almost like interior mind space, interior storytelling, where you're expressing that character a lot. And so I think that's kind of where we find some great room for overlap is if you have a space where you have a very limited cast and dealing a lot with the wilds and sort of these chasing people over the plains, having a story that's so driven on a person's personal experience allows the writer then to really get into their psyche and express that, as well as if they do have someone come along with them, like in True Grit, where you have Rooster Cogburn going along. You can spend a lot of time developing that relationship between the two characters.
Right. And then again, you have this like. I'm always amazed. I mean, there are, or were, I think, probably more in the past, talented Hollywood writers who would take the Western and that whole, concept of vengeance,
right,
and find ways to approach it. All right, not traditional, not copying what gone before. And I'm thinking of the myriad dozens of Clint Eastwood westerns that he made in his career, and the one that fits this particular topic is Hang 'Em High.
Yeah,
right. I mean, that basically is the concept of he's this innocent rancher at the start of the film who or whatever bought a couple of horses, and out of the blue in the opening scene of the film, these angry townspeople come charging up to him, out in the plains, and basically, where'd you get those horses? And you stole them, and blah blah blah. And he's trying to tell them he didn't steal them, but hey, they're not going to listen, right? Let's hang him up right here, and they do, and they ride off. Thing is, he's Clint Eastwood, and he's hard to kill. So basically, somebody finally comes along with him still hanging there and cuts him down. Rest of the film, he's got this scar burn around his neck, which was pretty gruesome. But he makes it back to town and literally goes to see the judge and explains to the judge what happened to him. And, the judge basically says, so what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go after him, and I'm going to, blah, blah, blah. And the judge, well, I can't let you do that. That's, being a vigilante, blah, blah, blah. And the judge literally gives him a badge and says, you can go get him, but bring him in. They'll stand trial and whatever. And that's Hang 'Em High. And it's one of the best Eastwood films he ever did. I mean, I think there's a line in it where he comes up to one of these guys in a saloon, and he's like giving him a hard time or whatever. And the guy's sitting there drinking, and finally, he's trying to ignore Eastwood, and Eastwood finally looks down at him and he says, when you hang a man, look him in the face. And then the guy looks up and, holy shit, I'm screwed right here. Only Eastwood could pull that off. Just
sure.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. And oh gosh, what was I going to say?
I mean, to me, it's no surprise that Eastwood eventually ends up doing Dirty Harry after all the westerns he did, because like you were talking about, Tim, all right, we get those iconic elements of the western in the rugged individual who works like on the edge of the law, right? And that's Dirty Harry. I mean, he's going to break every rule in the book that bring down the bad guys. Just very much a cowboy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we also get that a lot when you look at sort of the I'm just going to get into like how the sausage is made, but when you get into the skeleton of the character as you're creating them, right, the backbone that you kind of give each character in their outline, that okay, if you're ever in a situation, you can go back to this, like these are their traits, this is how they'll react in a situation, and in sort of these Western type characters, especially ones that deal with revenge stories, I feel like you find a lot of characters that have really strong traits that are almost act like double-edged swords, right? Where they're hyper individualistic, which makes them very self-capable, but also they turn people away when they offer help, right? You have people who are very like rugged and stubborn, so they trudge through a lot, but also they're not as quick to adapt their plans. And usually you find that also in a lot of a lot of bad guys where like they'll be the one that doesn't change up their plans. So when they roll into town the same way, the good guys already set up on a different situation they're not prepared for, and that's how you get them in the crosshair in the shootout. Support your local gunslinger was one such. When we're talking about like if people listening to this after or watching it live are wanting to go out and create a Western comic or create a revenge story, something that I would greatly encourage them to do is spend a lot of time not necessarily thinking about the shootouts or how we're going to like set these action sequences, and we will spend time I think next week talking about shootouts and how do you craft a good fight scene, but use those as like icing on the cake. Spend a lot of time focusing on the meat and potatoes of your story, which is going to be the characters and building those really strong backbones, and then also in your mind playing with how they're going to mesh, like how it is your protagonists and supporting characters, where do they mesh and where do they clash, and then same with the antagonists, because you're going to find a lot of times that in a lot of these stories the antagonist and protagonist probably have a lot of like similarities. It's just that they're mirrors of each other, and one person decided to be a little selfish with theirs, while the other person decided to either seek justice or defend their town, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about this, a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about Westerns in general, and if you study, the history of the West and some of the actual characters, all right, who lived at the time, you come to realize that a lot of them lived in that gray area that you're talking about, Tim, where for a period of time it was like, okay, well, you know what? I can't find a decent living anywhere, so I think I'll rustle a few cattle or whatever, all right, and make a few bucks. But then within 6 months or whatever, they ride into a different town and they're looking for, somebody to be a sheriff or a deputy. Well, what's the pay? I'll do that. And it was like this ambivalence, moral ambivalence of, okay, it's just a job, all right? So, a couple of years I'll be a lawman, and another couple of years I'll be one of the outlaws.
Yeah.
And they were okay with that. They were just fine with that. Unfortunately, a lot of them ended up being on the wrong side when they were caught.
Yeah.
And I mean, if anybody remembers, the miniseries, which I think is one of the greatest series, Western series ever brought to television, Lonesome Dove.
Yep.
When you follow Lonesome Dove, one of the characters is played by Robert Urich. And early on in the miniseries, he's a friend of the two Texas Rangers. And you come to find out that at one time he was a Ranger himself. And that's how they got to know him. And he was a friend. And so the series travels over a period of months. Well, by the time you get to the second half of the series, he basically left the center stage. You didn't know where he went to. And ultimately, they run across him when they catch these two guys stealing horses, and York is with them. And now they've caught him stealing horses. And they have no other recourse. And again, here we go, the code of the West or whatever, all right, that they're going to hang those two guys and their friend with them. Because they can't morally hang the two guys without hanging York. Yep. So there's this point where he's on the horseback with the noose around his neck and telling his former buddies that, hey, bad luck. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. There we go. And boom. And that's it. And his character. All right. So again, these are elements. Again, if we're talking to, writers out there who are like giving some thought to writing a Western revenge series, graphic novel or whatever, one of my suggestions would be, in developing your characters, And again, this idea of, understand that gray area. But if you're, what you want to look at is your hero, your protagonist, who is going to go on this odyssey of, vengeance or whatever, all right? And basically decide what fuels that, what sparks that, what is the thing that he or she loves and cherishes that is ultimately killed, destroyed, taken away from them, stolen from them. I mean, you could do a slight variation of the revenge story where somebody's wife is kidnapped by a bunch of outlaws, and he saddles up and he's a farmer, but he goes after them anyways. And it's not so much revenge as, again, wanting to get back what was taken from him. And that's pretty much what spurs most vengeance stories. Something precious is taken away from the protagonist.
Yeah.
And that's what kicks off the story.
Yeah. And it can also be something as, and it was a very common thing to have taken from you, is to have some semblance of order, that you have your life set up in a certain way, and that gets ripped away at some point. This isn't necessarily a revenge story, but kind of as you're talking about, and I mentioned earlier, it's a local gunslinger. That was a character who is a kind of reluctant hero, where he was, for the most part, an outlaw, but when a town needed a sheriff, they're like, hey, you're the most capable gunfighter in town.
There you go.
But I kind of think about, I was going back to like Hell on Wheels kind of being an atypical story where Anson's Mount character was kind of thrown into an unfamiliar situation where his understanding of the way life was kind of thrown out the window well before the story was started, where he was in the South, so he fought for the Confederacy, despite the fact that he wasn't a slave owner and wasn't part of any of those families, and wasn't sold on the whole idea. He was just a fighting age down there. And so then he ends up now in the North when the railroads are reconstructed, and so he kind of gets his life thrown sort of in the wind one way when the war starts. The war ends and he's thrown out the other way. And now he is trying to fight and put together some semblance of control over his life, working for the railroad company, taking on jobs that he doesn't necessarily want to do or is eager to do, but is put in a situation where now he's also sympathetic to when you have these side character stories for people who do need a more straightforward revenge. Need a revenge? Have a more straightforward revenge story happening as a B plot for the episode, where he's like, hey, I understand what it's like to have something taken away from you. Like, I don't know what my life is like right now. So he finds himself in a position where he's, because he's been in this position of having something stripped away from him, where now he as a character makes a lot more sense jumping into these other stories or these other points, intervening on other people's behalf and carrying out kind of the action role in these revenge stories.
I remember watching Hell on Wheels when it first came off. Watched the first 2 or 3 seasons of it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but when he shows up in the first couple of episodes, all right, isn't there an element in there of he runs across some Union or soldiers or whatever that had destroyed his plantation or whatever?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And he basically kills them.
Yeah,
right?
and he's on the run, which is kind of
to the point where as the guy's dying, he's telling him why it was the war. That's what we all did. And I always remembered taking a step back because I love the fact of how they wrote that to the point where he all he can see is the agony of the war, what he lost, and again what we're talking about, all right, and getting his own kind of personal vengeance, all right, where he can't take on the entire army, but this is one of the guys he knows did it, and he kills the poor guy, all right, but then feels the guilt of that action.
Absolutely,
of realizing, what the hell have I done? All right, the war is over, and I'm still fighting it. I'm still killing people.
Yeah.
All right, and that's who his character is as the series continue. And it was like you said, it makes him way more complicated and complex and fascinating to see how he reacts to all the other people in this huge, manifest destiny of moving westward. and the people he comes in contact with.
Yeah. And also allows for like these really like deep interpersonal moments with his supporting character, who's I can't remember his name, but he's played by Common.
Yep.
Who's a freed slave, and they have this whole dynamic of our past lives are like are directly antagonistic to each other, but we're working together now, and we have to figure out what our level of like professional respect is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
I actually liked Common's character in that show. I thought he was a great character, like a great ground. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's a few episodes where like he kind of went off and did his own thing, but I thought he was like just a really great lightning rod. You know, a good ground point for Anson's character to like kind of recenter and then go and do other stuff. You know?
Absolutely. I think. Go ahead.
So I wanted to ask Jose. So I mean, talking about this, what other westerns did you enjoy and remember as classics?
Oh, I'm a huge fan of the Magnificent Seven. I mentioned last week that my dad is just his favorite like all-time movie was The Wild Bunch. And so I'm actually not surprised at all when because I didn't know that about my dad until after him and I took him, my son, and my father-in-law and my dad, and just for a guy's day, we went to go watch the newer Magnificent Seven with Denzel Washington and Chris Pratt.
Yeah.
Took them all to go see that because I know both my father-in-law and my dad like westerns. And then my son had never seen the original ones. So, you know what I mean? Taking him to go see that one, and then we'll go back and watch the other ones later. But like we have an opportunity to for you to be able to see this at the theater, and so like we're gonna take advantage of that. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Magnificent Seven, Yul Brynner, and those I don't know, the idea of like, gathering a group of fighters to come help, and then I mean, not to ruin it for everybody, but that movie's like 40 something years old or something and more. So just so you know, most of them die. But like to see like there's a little bit of interaction and whatnot, and you know what I mean, and then just on to straight up onslaught. You know what I mean? Like fight small group of people fighting against overwhelming odds. It's
well, yeah, and it plays off. It ironically plays off almost like paring away this whole concept of vengeance or revenge or whatever. All right, because again, this time you have this idea of this small Mexican village, all right, who is basically robbed every year. This outlaw gang of banditos come in and steal their harvest. They work all year long, grow all these vegetables and blah blah blah, and make a living, and in come the banditos and steal everything they have. They can't fight to get it back. So what they're going to do is hire somebody else to get theirs back. It's like a revenge by hire. We'll hire gunfighters. All right. The joy of the Magnificent Seven in both the original with Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen and them, and the one done with Denzel Washington, whatever is, then you get this ability to look at these characters who are for the most part bad guys, outlaws, right? And most of them, all right, in their shady past or whatever, all right, who get called on this mission, all right, that eventually they're fighting for something which has not been a part of their lives. All right, they don't have anything they own. They don't have any self-worth.
They have no stock in it, right?
Right. They have no self-worth. They're nothing but drifters, and suddenly they're put into this campaign of becoming heroes for this small little Mexican village. All right, and that nobility eventually strikes them as being something worth giving their lives for. It's a real flip, but there's a connection there that what we're talking about here, and it happens in a Western, which I find ironic, as all of us probably know, and most people do as well too. All right, this was a ripoff of a Japanese film.
Yep.
Right, The Seven Samurai.
The samurai. Yep.
Right, right. Every culture has this idea of wandering, you know,
Mhm.
warriors, all right, of gunfighters or samurais, all right, who are looking for a reason to be, for a reason um, that they're here in this world, and something noble and that they can actually fight for.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like, in America we have our cowboys. Japan, it's the samurai, specifically the Ronin, the masterless samurai who travel
Yep.
usually because their master's been killed or their family's been killed, and their master releases them to go out and seek their honor. In Germany and as you had the Landsknecht, and to a point also you had uh, somewhat idealized as well, but the idea of pirates, privateers, and buccaneers, right? The fact that there were pirates out there causing havoc. So you'd have the privateer, the person who would come up, buy their commission, buy their boat, and go out and hunt the pirate to destroy their town. And if you ever want to write a story, historically set, all these things kind of happened roughly at the same time, late 1800s. So if you want to have a samurai from the Meiji Reformation, a cowboy, a Landsknecht, and a member from the last ages of the Bronze Age of Spanish piracy, that's all the same 10-year span. You can throw them together.
Right.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I think there's also something so interesting about how we kind of talked about how almost why these stories can be so appealing is that there's almost an alien nature to them. The idea that now that you're not going to see someone grab a 6-shooter and leave their house to go find someone who stole their cattle, right?
Nope.
I mean, you
I
might,
mean,
but that
I went
person's
in the other room.
so you might hear about that person's probably going to be arrested and on the 5 o'clock news. But in theory, this wasn't all that long ago in the grand scheme of things where these stories were happening. And I think that's also another interesting point of the fact that not a whole lot of time has passed. So sort of these elements in the zeitgeist, this sort of cultural ideas that sort of are, if you want to get like mimetic memory, the idea that a culture can have a memory that's passed down. The same ideals are still kind of fresh enough that we as a society can still be are fully recognize and relate to anything that goes into a good revenge story. That's all something you can relate to because of these personal motivators that allow for a lot of good character expression, character depth. Where you're going to have characters like Ensign Mount, who is driven by ghosts of the past in moments of passion, but is also haunted by the guilt of what he is currently doing and has done. And you're going to have a lot of really complex emotions, and while you're going to have these very, you can sandwich it with really climactic gunfights and action sequences. I feel like these revenge stories really kind of live and breathe in these personal moments where characters are reflecting on something or expressing something.
Yep, agreed, totally. I have to share with you guys because we're talking about this stuff and it's fun. I mean, after World War II, the whole concept, television comes into its own, and suddenly you have this visual media that catches on real quick around the globe, right? And suddenly with television you have movies being played, and the rest of the world suddenly starts to know who or what America is and what its culture is. Well, oddly enough, I mean, by the time you get to the 50s, the majority of television shows on television, again, we talked about this last week, is basically Westerns or a few, lawyer shows or cop shows, but Westerns just predominate American television, all right? Okay, so this whole idea of Americans being cowboys plays itself on a lot of foreign cultures. And I can remember when I was in Vietnam, right? And one day was talking, I'd had guard duty the night before. And so I didn't have duty the next morning. So sleeping in the hooch. And we were hiring these local Vietnamese women to come and clean our barracks during the day. And what they would do is they would come in and they would, there'd be one to each floor, two to each barrack. When lunchtime came, they'd get together in one of the barracks, and each of these women would bring some food, some vegetables, some chopped meat or whatever. They had a big wok, and they would put everything in it and communally sit around with rice and have their lunch together. So now I'm waking up around noontime after having guard duty the night before, and as it turns out, these mama sons were having their lunch up on the floor of where I had my sleeping quarters, and I can smell the food. So I get up and I throw on my pants and my boots, and I go walking over, and there they are sitting, and they see me, and they start motioning me over, right? So I sit down, and they've got a portable TV. They've got it on, and while they're eating, they offer me some food. So they give me a bowl of this fried rice with chicken dish, which was absolutely delicious. And as I'm sitting there on the floor with them, they got this little black and white TV, and they're watching Bonanza in Vietnamese. All right, listening to Papa Cartwright and I said, I'm like, you guys like Bonanza? Oh, Cowboy Bonanza, number one Bonanza, Little Joe, yeah. Yeah, okay. That's their idea, okay? It's like, yeah, you Americans, cowboys, yeah.
Right.
Cracked me up.
I mean, yeah, that was even like in Japan too. You had like the when after we got like really good relationships with them after like the base in Okinawa settled and everything like that. You kind of got like these American like little Americas where like Japanese people are supposed to be able to experience America, and it's all like cowboy hats and big burgers and things like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, for the longest time, I mean that's the cultural image they got. All right.
Right.
Like I said, it's like television, and all these series, we just bombarded the rest of the world, and that's that attitude they had. And it's not 100% incorrect. All right, because again, like we were talking about, this inner cultural identity, a psyche of what shaped America after the Civil War, and a great part of that, was shaped and molded in the American West.
Yeah,
and I think it's still a big part of our psyche today.
Absolutely. I mean, you have like this really weird kind of like this lingering effect too, where so much of like even where I live at Oregon, right, where like part of it being like one of the last states to be formally adopted, but so much of it is now like wanting to preserve this idea of the naturalism and like the like room exploration that happened when settlers first came over here and like settled Oregon City and set up like the beaver exchanges. And so many of like our streets and things are named after those like explorers, cowboys, whatever they came through. Even to a point where there's a cultural experience not too dissimilar between like Oregon and New Mexico if you're a farmer, right? Because you had a lot of those like connection with like the Mexican farmers and all the stuff down there. And in Oregon, there was a lot of like South Americans and Cubans actually ended up finding their way up there to a point where like Che Guevara is an important historical figure in Oregon because of importance to farming. This is really weird. Yeah, you have these really weird connections of like so much of the Wild West is still influential in ways that you don't necessarily see or possibly can see, like we're going to relate to on the surface, but it's still there, and it informs as things go forward.
Yeah, agree totally. Again, it's like it's we were talking about this whole idea of that shift into the 20th century to 21st century, all right, and watching basically this anti-hero concept that Eastwood propagated in most of the films he did, even taking it to playing modern day cops in modern day good guys or whatever, all right? But it's still the cowboy mentality. It's still that
Yeah.
rugged individual. One guy can make a difference, and that I think it's basically a theme that is probably going to be with this country, for generations to come. All right,
Mhm.
it's just that we still believe, all right, i.e., a country of freedom, a country of democracy, that if you're on the side of right and you're willing to stand up for it. And again, it's all falling back on the heroes that all of us grew up watching on television, reading in comic books, and especially westerns, definitely westerns.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if people want to go ahead and catch a modern comic that is a Western revenge story, if you go on to Kickstarter and follow the link in our description in the chats, go to the Kickstarter and get your backing in for Hamlet's End issue number 1.
Please.
Yes.
I mean, the artist is, and I can't finish, this show without tipping my hat to Zane the Game, who is the artist. All right, and when you saw that video at the start of the hour, that work is absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful.
So good.
Zane, like Jose, is a fellow graduate of the Cooper School, and I mean, last time he and I got together and talked about where he was at with issue number 1, etc. I mean, he's put over 300 hours already in this issue number 1, and it shows on every single page, every single panel. It's a labor of love for Zane, and I am so thrilled to be working with him. I'm excited about the project. Like I said, I've already written the second script, and hopefully we can get the backing, we can get this book out, and turn right around and start working on issue number 2. And once he starts doing his artwork on that, I'll start writing number 3. It's going to be a 5-issue miniseries, and good Lord willing, we get it done, we get it out, and maybe eventually collect it as a big old Western graphic novel.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
sure
the
do.
videos of Zane working on the pages, like that guy is, he's just putting the work in, because just the amount of detail he's putting in every page, it's crazy. Yeah, I've even going back to the Kickstarter page just to look at some of the pages. It is a saved tab on my phone. Every morning I go and I check it and I go back and relook at the pages, because just some of the techniques that he's used in there, I was like, oh man, that's really good. I like how he did that. I love going back and seeing it. I truly do.
Well, I mean, hey,
So,
look, to me, the fun of doing this is always been the fact that it's a collaborative process. Comics,
yeah,
it's why I love them so much, especially when I get to work with talented artists like Zane. So, case in point, I initially wrote the script as a 22-page book. Okay, just had 22 in my head, wrote it, and said, okay, it works. Well, Zane starts working on it, doing the sketching and whatever, and we're meeting like once a week, having coffee and talking about where it's going. And I think about 2 or 3 weeks into the project, he sits down with me one day and he says, hey, would you mind if I expanded those last couple pages? And I went, no. He goes, no, he says, we got to wrap issue number 1 with a little bit of a punch. And he says, what you set up, he said, I'm not going to change, but he said, I want to expand the panels. I want to stretch them. I said, what are you talking about? He said, let's go to 24 pages. So I want to have a nice double-page spread that's really
nice.
going to, the reader look and go, wow, this is awesome. All right. And there was a little surprise at the end that we set up. Hey, go for it. I'm excited. Right. All right. And again, that's that commitment. All right. It's just not a job for him. All right. He's putting everything that he's learned into this project and making it better with every page he does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, it shows. Like his work is great.
Yeah. As a comic book writer, you can't ask for any more from a partner.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I can't wait to get my copy and page through it. All right. And also, we have to thank our parent network. I don't know, parent or partner network, because we think we also don't. Networking is weird. We're on multiple different networks, but also our partner network, the Madness Entertainment Group. I put it at the top of the show as well. Tim Vigil is doing Gothic Knights revamped the 28th in the morning. So head on over to Madness Entertainment Group on their YouTube page. If you're already watching there, great. Just click on the little button below you and hit the notify me button on that live stream for the Tim Vigil launch party. Tim Vigil, of course, a veteran of the game as well. Worked on things like Transformers and all of that good stuff.
Yep.
There you
So, yeah, interesting bit of trivia. I've actually colored in a cover Tim Mitchell did. He did a cover for my friend Nick's small press company, Pickle Press,
Nice.
and I got to color it in.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's
Yeah, it's pretty
dope.
fun.
Cool.
All right.
Very cool.
Well, thank you all for watching. We'll see you all next week. And I believe our topic is shootouts, but let me confirm that. Pull up our stream schedule. Boop, boop, boop. Yes, next week our topic is the perfect shootout.
The perfect shootout.
So we'll be talking about specifically how you choreograph and block action sequences as they relate to westerns, and of course there's going to be stuff in there that relates to any sort of action comic that has guns as well. And thanks for chatting, Ryan, as well. Another great show host.
Yeah, I've actually been on his show too.
I have as well. So yeah, we'll be talking
Yeah.
about the perfect shootout next week. And make sure to check out Wednesday Night and Silver Sunday on their respective days, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope you all have a great week. And until next time,
Make
Make mine
Silverline.
Silverline.
Hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.